In EDU 565, we've been learning about the needs of diverse learners and ways that we can differentiate our instruction, our activities, and our assessments to meet their needs. So for this project, I'm going to go through 5 lessons that I've used in the past, but now through the modified versions that I've created, including the differentiation pieces and how we can accommodate for their needs. So in the description to this video, you'll find a link to this PowerPoint slide that has all of the resources for the lessons that I use from day to day, as well as a detailed copy of the lesson plans for each day. I would go through each one of these individual differentiation pieces, but there are 6 per lesson, and the last time that I tried making this video it was over 45 minutes long. So I'm going to give a general overview of what differentiation in math looks like, and then in each lesson I'll give just a couple examples, and if you want to see more detailed you can check out those lesson plans. So these are the 6 categories that I'm kind of working on differentiating for within my classroom. The first one being talented and gifted students. For math differentiation, a lot of our differentiation looks like open-ended questions, critical thinking questions, potentially creating activities for other students to try. I like this one because it challenges them to think backwards. Instead of always solving a problem, they're actually having to create a problem and view it from a different perspective. Sometimes I'll have these students work on verbalizing their thought through peer tutoring because that tends to be very difficult. Sometimes our talented and gifted students just kind of get it right away and they don't know how they know what the answers are. They just have figured out a way to get to the answer but can't explain it. So challenging them to do that. And then also having them try to use multiple strategies to solve the same problem. So instead of doing it the same way every time, see if they can find another solution. Another category is our ELL students. In our school, we have iPads that they use to translate things from the internet. Some other strategies that we use for differentiation are to create videos that demonstrate skills so that they can reflect on those, to provide copies of notes for them, and just to have the students repeat back the instruction to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to do before moving into independent work time. For our students with IEPs, these also vary, but some of our most common things that we do are providing extended time, copy of notes, frequent check-ins, and also limiting answer options. For our trauma-sensitive students, these students really just need to know that we are there to support them and that we want them to be successful. And so creating that environment and building a relationship is really key here. So we try to provide opportunities for them to collaborate with classmates. We try to provide them additional resources, so if one strategy didn't work, they can pick a different one. We give them choice in how they're going to solve things, and sometimes they just need to decrease the amount of stress and the amount of things that they have to do. So sometimes we just take away some of the quantity of things that they're working on by limiting the number of problems that they need to solve. For students with dyscalculia, this is a really important one to focus on for math differentiation. Manipulatives are very helpful, number lines, times tables. For this standard is actually the first time that they're allowed to use calculators, so teaching them the skills to be able to use that tool successfully is key. And also providing like a math cheat sheet that has all the formulas that we might be using can be very beneficial so that they're not trying to remember these things all the time. Students with ADHD, they can sometimes benefit from just getting a little bit of extra movement in or a different learning style that matches their needs a little bit better. So I like to provide some flexible seating. I have a class runner that will do a lot of tasks for me, things like chasing dice when we're using them, kicking them across the floor, turning the lights on and off for videos, those type of things. I also like to use timers to keep them on track when they're working independently or in small groups so that they have something every 3 minutes to refocus them, and then just checking in with them myself. Standard 2 focuses on rational numbers, so dealing with fractions and decimals. This is something that 7th grade students have previous knowledge with, so we're going to try to access some of that by using our large group and table group questions to begin the class period. After we've done a little bit of warm-up, I always show the students our rubric for the standard. So starting at level 1, students can compare and order rational numbers, and they can convert between decimals and fractions. And this is honestly where our first 5 lessons are really going to focus. We will get into level 2 a little bit where they can solve problems using rational numbers in all 4 operations, but our ultimate goal for the standard is to be able to solve word problems. So after we've gone over the rubric and showed them all of the standards from down below that they'll be addressing, students will have time to work on their pretest. So this pretest is going to collect background knowledge and help kind of retrieve some of those ideas from some previous grades. So this is the one that I would give the majority of my students. There's a variety of questions. Some are fill in the blank, some are multiple choice. There are some word problems down here, and just a nice little variety to try and retrieve some of that memory from before. So in order to modify this and make some accommodations for some students, for students who might need some more guidance, I would create all of these to be multiple choice questions. And I might even limit some options, so there might only be 3 options instead of 4. However, I do like to make sure that the options that are incorrect still address misconceptions so that I can see what misconceptions our students might have and what we can change as we go forwards. As far as students who need a further challenge, I'd actually leave them all as open-ended questions and not provide any of the multiple choice. And then I'd also like to include some in that give examples of student answers that are incorrect, and the students have to identify where the mistake went, so kind of critiquing other people's work. Okay, so for day 2, we have a couple different things going on. I like to start sometimes with a quick game to kind of get kids going and thinking. So quick conversions is a game that I made up. It uses a Quizlet set on the board, and there's just one card at a time. Each team sends a representative from their table up to the board. They face the back of the classroom, and when I count to 3, they quickly turn around, and the first person who can answer the question correctly earns a point for their team, and we might play to 4, 5, 6 points. It's just a fun way for this one to see what kids already actually know, and they might not even realize it. And once they've done that, then we'll start talking about, well, what happens when we have fractions and decimals that we don't just know? How can we use strategies to go ahead and convert? So we've created this activity here. It is a note-taking activity with some practice. So there are 3 different skills: fractions to decimals, decimals to fractions, and improper fractions that students need to be able to do to complete the level 1 problems for the assessment. So each one of these, there's a link here that goes to a web page that is math notes and examples. So they would read through this page, and there are 3 different strategies. So in the notes section, they would have 3 different bullet points with the notes. And then at the bottom of the page, there are questions here where it says your turn. They would click on these and they would go ahead and complete the questions. If they answer a question incorrectly, so they're all multiple choice, if they answer incorrectly, it tells you it's not the right answer and explains how you should do it. And then they continue on from there. So I like this activity because there's lots of ways that we can differentiate it. For students that are a little bit more independent and could use a challenge, they can just try to work through it on their own. And then the last 5 questions, questions 5 through 10, are actually a lot harder. So there are some challenge ones that the students can use to see what they can really figure out on their own. For students who need more guidance, maybe some of my students that have IEPs, or my ELL students that need more structured in their notes, we could go through the first one together and really model what those notes should look like. And then for the quiz, only having them do the first 5 questions can help limit some of the stress. The final thing that students would do here after they've gone through this is they'd actually go through and they would select one strategy that they like best for each one, and they would highlight that one, and that's going to be their preferred strategy moving forward to complete those skills. So day 3 starts off with an opportunity for students to apply what they learned yesterday with their different strategies. So when students come in, I'd place them in groups, and they would get this little packet of cards that are already cut out, and their challenge is to order them from least to greatest. This might seem like a simple challenge, but there are fractions and decimals, negatives and positives, so it actually ends up being a very challenging activity for most students, and they have to come up with a strategy in order to be successful. Some students will separate the negatives and the positives and do those separately. Some will convert everything to a fraction or everything to a decimal. It just kind of depends on what they feel comfortable doing. So after they complete the challenge, then we just have a little discussion of what were some of those effective strategies, and why do we need to be able to convert back and forth. Because there are some situations in the real world where fractions are more useful, and there are some situations where decimals are more useful. So we want to know the comparison between them. So after we've had that challenge and that conversation, we're just going to review the strategies from the notes from the day before. So to do that, I just have some different examples here. Students could volunteer to come up and share the strategy that they prefer to use and demonstrate it on the board here. You get some movement in. Students can come up, they can walk around, they can share their ideas, and kind of go through each of those. So it also adds some opportunities for leadership and then just some review for students who needed more clarification on the activity from the day before. After we've reviewed those, we're going to go to the formative assessment, which is our checkpoint and be the first one of this standard. This is the one that I would give to the majority of students. It asks them here for each skill to describe the strategy that they're going to use. So how do you change a fraction to a decimal? They're just going to describe and say, this is what I'm going to do, and then they're going to perform the skill 3 times. And they're going to do that for all 3 of the skills from the activity from the day before. To differentiate this, for students who need an extra challenge, I might require them to provide 2 strategies here and then complete the skill. And for students who need some more guidance, I would actually have the notes already filled in here with just, this is one way to do it, and they could use that strategy to go ahead and complete the skills down below. When we were doing this activity too, I should mention another way that we can differentiate is with our strategic grouping. And so that could simply be taking all the students who need a challenge, putting them together and giving them a harder set of cards to work through. And maybe taking the students who need more guidance, putting them together and giving them a strategy to use. Telling them, hey, let's convert all of these fractions into decimals before we start ordering them. Just giving them that little bit of guidance so that they can be successful moving forward. In day 4, this is one of my favorite activities in this standard. This is the day that we get to start using our calculators. And this is like a big day for 7th grade because it's the first year they're allowed to use their calculators. And I'm just going to give them a lot of time to explore. So we would actually start this day by handing back the checkpoint, and students would reflect on that really quick in their journals. They would write down what skills maybe they need to keep working on and what strategies or what resources they're going to refer to in order to continue working on that. And then I'm really going to give them about 25 to 30 minutes even to work through this calculator activity. They're going to explore it first, and then with the last 5 minutes, or the last 10 minutes, we'll go ahead and discuss some of the key ones here. So this activity consists of 16 different tasks that students are asked to try to figure out how to do on their calculator. And some of them they might know how to do, some of them they have no idea. So their challenge is just to explore. They can use any resources they want. So if they want to look up videos online, they can. If they just want to try to mess around with the buttons on their own, they can do that as well. But as they complete a task, they're just going to write down the description of how they completed the task in each box. And they're going to see how many of those they can complete within the time. And I like this activity because it's accessible for everyone. There are questions that are super simple, like what calculator do you have? They're just finding the brand name and writing it down. There's ones like how do you turn off the calculator? Okay, so very, very accessible. But then there are ones that are a lot more challenging, like how do you access the different colored functions above or below the keys? So this is referring to like the second button on a calculator that allows for additional functions. There are some questions that ask for multiple strategies and multiple ways to insert things. So these questions can challenge the students who need a challenge, and then there are the questions that are accessible for everyone to be able to do. For students who maybe get a little bit overwhelmed, maybe some of like our trauma students who might look at this and just kind of shut down, we can X out some of those ones that they're not going to use in this standard. And we can just focus on here are the key things that you need to be able to do. So again, really easy to go ahead and modify that. At the end of this class period, there's multiple ways that we can do formative assessment. My go-to lately for this one has been to use tweets. So they get 140 characters and they post in their Google Classroom stream instead of posting it on Twitter. Something that they learned about their calculator. And I like this one because it's nice and quick and it allows me to get an overall feel for what did we pick up from our calculator skills and what do we still need to work on. Another one that I have done before is to actually have kids pick one of these tasks that they figured out how to do and share it on Flipgrid so that we actually get a collection of all the different tasks and we can see within our class were we able to get all 16 of them figured out or not. So that's kind of a fun way to do it. That one takes a little bit more time though, and I haven't done that in the most recent years, but still a good option for a formative assessment. Maybe a good challenge one for students who might still need a further challenge. All right, and for the 5th day, we have some opportunities for students to practice now using their calculators. Since the day before they were kind of just exploring, here's our real challenge to see what they really figured out. So we actually start off this day by going through some fill-in-the-blank notes. And these are notes that I might give some students some copies for some of my students that have like ADHD and can't focus quite as easily, it gives them something tangible right in front of them so that they can write on it. And I just like to remind students that if we're doing this by hand, there's a lot of steps. And so that's why it's so important that we learn to use our calculators efficiently. And so they go through these notes kind of together, see if we can fill them in, and then we get to practice using our calculators instead to see how fast we can get going. And so for this one, I have a couple foam dice in my classroom, and I give them to students and they can roll them around, and it kind of gets them moving and interacting a little bit, and then they get to create the problems, and since they created the problems, it seems so much more fun for them to be able to do. So this is set up, you would just put a numerator, denominator, numerator, denominator. You as a teacher can pick the operation, and if you want to add in negatives, you can. If you want to do mixed numbers, you can. If you want to do decimals, again, you can do that. You're just making up problems for kids to type into their calculator. As soon as the problem's set up, you hit the timer here for 30 seconds and see if they can solve it within 30 seconds. By the time you're done playing this game in about 10 minutes or so, they usually can solve most of them in about 10 seconds, and they're pretty quick. So really increasing that efficiency on their calculator. After we've practiced using that, and I'm confident that everybody's good at using their fraction button and they know how to change fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions, I give kids some time to work on Delta Math. And this is a website I've really enjoyed using because it allows for some natural differentiation. So Delta Math is set up by grade level. It starts at 6th grade and it goes all the way through college leveled math, actually. And so this green here is our 7th grade math, and right now we're working on rational number operations, and you can see here there are different levels. So if I just want them focusing on adding and subtracting for the day, I can focus on just that skill, but then I also have the option between level 1 and level 2. So level 1 problems are just simply adding or subtracting. Okay, they're positive fractions, positive rational numbers. But then I can go to level 2, and now I can add in negatives here. Okay, so I can differentiate based on the needs of my students and if they need a challenge or if they need something a little bit simpler. And I like Delta Math because there are videos that show kind of how to do each step for reteaching opportunities. As they answer questions, it will either give them a green check mark here or an X if it's incorrect, and if it's incorrect, it tells them step by step what they needed to do to solve that. So there's just a tons of different skills here. I could go over here, rational number conversions. We were also working on taking fractions to decimals, so I could use those ones as well. If I thought kids needed more of a challenge, I can do mixed operations. There are even word problems in here. So there's just a ton of options. And really, the Delta Math here is the formative assessment for this day, because I get all of the data back. I can see how long students spent on assignments, I can see how many questions they missed, what were our most commonly missed questions, what skills we're struggling with, so on and so forth. So a great tool to be able to use there. And again, allowing students to use those calculators is helpful for all students, but especially for our students that might have dyscalculia and are struggling to recall some of those facts. They no longer really need to be able to recall the fact. We just want them to know how to type it in their calculator, because moving forwards, again, our ultimate goal is to get to word problems and real-world application. So again, the link to this presentation, as well as more detailed examples of all of our differentiation, you can see are found on this lesson plan here. So for example, here's day 1. It goes through our anticipatory set, the activity, and the wrap-up. It has an example here of different ways to differentiate for this specific lesson with our sources here, citing it, as well as the formative assessment and any modifications that might need to be made to that to accommodate for different needs of our students. So there's one of these for each of those 5 days, so you can feel free to take a look at those for more detailed. But overall, again, these are kind of our general math differentiation strategies that we would be using kind of on and off depending on the different tasks and the different skills that we're working on.